At the start of the movie, William Foster is stuck in a traffic jam on his way to meet his ex-wife Beth and attend his daughter Adele's birthday. Foster is an engineer, recently laid off in the early 1990s recession. Tired of waiting for so long, he decides to walk all the way home and leaves his car behind in the traffic. Foster arrives at a phone booth and repeatedly calls Beth, but soon runs out of change. Meanwhile, back in the traffic jam, other people start to get angry since Foster's abandoned car is in their way. Police Sergeant Martin Prendergast happens to be stuck there as well, so he helps move Foster's car off the road. It's Prendergast's last day before retirement. Having no change, Foster goes to a convenience store and attempts to break a dollar bill for more phone calls. However, the Korean owner refuses and demands Foster make a purchase instead so he can have the remaining change. The latter reluctantly gets a can of soda and places it on the counter. But when Foster realizes that the soda costs him 85 cents so he wouldn't have enough money to make phone calls, he starts to argue with the owner. Foster vents out that America has given so much money to Korea, but as an American citizen, he cannot even get change for a dollar bill. Hearing this, the enraged owner threatens Foster with a baseball bat. However, Foster seizes the bat and destroys overpriced items on the shelf, scolding the owner for his unreasonably high prices. He justifies that he's just standing up for his rights as a consumer. Foster then pays for the drink before leaving with the bat. Meanwhile, at the police station, Prendergast gets pranked by his colleagues for his last day at work. Fellow police officer Sandra is sad that her work buddy is retiring. Elsewhere, while sitting with his drink and looking over the city through a hole in his shoe, Foster is approached by two gang members. They extort him with a knife and demand his briefcase as a toll for trespassing on their land. Irritated, Foster attacks with the bat, leaving both injured. He then takes the knife and storms out of the place. In the police station, Mr. Lee, the Korean store owner, reports to Prendergast about Foster's attack, but he can only describe Foster as some white guy with a white shirt and a tie, and that he took his baseball bat. As there were no injuries or theft of any kind, the police dismiss his case. In the next scene, the two gang members, along with their friends, pursue Foster in a car to kill him for what he did earlier. One of the gang members' girlfriend warns them not to do anything serious in broad daylight, but she just gets thrown out of the car. Meanwhile, Foster once again calls Beth and tells her that he's coming home to attend Adele's birthday party. Beth, however, doesn't want him to come and orders him to stay away from her and Adele. The gang soon locates Foster at a phone booth where they open fire in a drive-by shooting, hitting several bystanders but missing Foster. The driver then loses control and crashes the car, instantly killing almost everyone. In no time, chaos erupts in the scene, and everyone starts running away in fear. However, Foster casually walks towards the crash site, picks up a dropped gun, and shoots the only surviving gang member in the leg. He then picks up a gym bag full of weapons and leaves the scene while the girlfriend comes running over to find her boyfriend dead in the crash. Meanwhile, at her home, Beth calls over some policemen, asking for security from her husband, who's soon coming to visit her. When one of the officers questions Beth about Foster's background, she reveals that she's put him under a restraining order because of his rather violent nature. Back at the police station, Prendergast learns about the drive-by shooting when he interrogates the girlfriend from earlier. She gives him the exact description of a man that Mr. Lee had given. Next, Foster goes to a Whammy Burger fast food restaurant and orders breakfast. But since it's past 11:30 a.m., the girl at the counter refuses to serve breakfast and instead offers him to order lunch. Foster demands to speak with the manager, but the latter also tells him the same. He then gets mad and pulls out the gun from his bag. Other customers immediately become terrified and attempt to leave the place, but Foster threatens them to stay. He then accidentally fires into the ceiling, petrifying everybody. Foster soon changes his mind and orders lunch, but becomes further annoyed when the burger he's served does not resemble the advertisement displayed on a board. Enraged, he blames the manager for deceiving people and overcharging food items. Elsewhere, Prendergast and Sandra go to a restaurant for lunch, but they're soon interrupted when one of their colleagues, Nick, informs them about the Whammy Burger incident. Prendergast believes that it's a one-man crime spree and gives Foster's description to Officer Sandra before she and Nick head out for further investigation. In the next scene, Foster passes a bank where a man of color protests against a rejected loan application. The man calls out the bank for not giving him the loan as he isn't economically viable. Soon, police officers arrive and arrest him. Before leaving, he looks at Foster and tells him not to forget him. Foster awkwardly nods his head. He then stops by a gift shop to buy a birthday present for his daughter. At Beth's home, it's been hours since the policemen have started waiting for Foster, so they conclude that her husband isn't going to come around and tell Beth that they're off duty. Before leaving, one of the officers tells Beth to call them if she gets into trouble with her husband. Meanwhile, Foster once again calls Beth from a phone booth, but as expected, she doesn't answer. He repeatedly tries calling her, but to no avail. Just then, a man who's in line behind him gets frustrated and shouts at him for taking such a long time. Enraged, Foster shoots the booth and tells the man that now he doesn't have to wait at all. Next, he stops at a military surplus store run by a white supremacist to buy a new pair of hiking boots. The owner shows Foster around his store, but angrily curses at a gay couple before driving them away. Shortly after, as Foster's selecting the shoes, he notices a police car. Realizing that he's in trouble, he immediately takes a pair of boots and hides in a dressing room. After a while, Officer Sandra enters the store and starts asking about the perpetrator who's been causing havoc in the streets. Luckily for Foster, the owner denies seeing any man wearing a white shirt and a tie. He then escorts her out of his store after asking her unnecessary questions. Once Sandra's gone, the owner invites Foster to his back room and offers him a rocket launcher. It turns out that he's mistaken Foster for another white supremacist after hearing about the Whammy Burger incident on television. However, Foster reveals that he is no supremacist and that he only wants to go home to attend his daughter's party, but gets caught up with idiots such as him. When Foster expresses disgust for the store owner's homophobia, the latter pulls a gun and attempts to turn him over to the police. He then checks the gym bag and destroys the present Foster had bought for his daughter. Infuriated, Foster successfully wounds the owner with a knife and shoots him dead with a handgun. He then changes into his clothes and takes the rocket launcher, calling his ex-wife again before leaving. At the police station, Prendergast takes his theory about Foster to his superior, Captain Yardley, but is humiliated in front of several officers. The captain thinks that Prendergast is overanalyzing the case. Despite this, Prendergast is hopeful about his investigation, so he and Sandra go to the convenience store to trace the start of the crimes. Luckily, he realizes the abandoned car he moved earlier was nearby. He then tells Sandra to look up Foster's personalized license plate to get his address. Elsewhere, Foster is once again caught up in traffic. He furiously approaches a road repair crew and accuses them of doing unnecessary repairs to justify their accounts to the government. With help from a young boy who mistakenly believes Foster is acting in a movie scene, Foster fires the rocket launcher, blowing up the construction site. Meanwhile, Prendergast and Sandra's investigation leads them to Foster's mother's home. She explains that her son isn't a murderer, although he can be tough to handle sometimes. Prendergast asks her to elaborate, and the latter reveals that sometimes she feels like he wants to kill her. She then tells the officers about his marital background. On the other hand, Foster cuts through a golf course where some elderly golfers enjoy their time on their private land. One of the elderly men becomes angry at Foster's presence and curses at him. He also hits him with a golf ball. Enraged, Foster shoots the golfer's cart, causing it to roll into a nearby pond. He vents out that they could have a public park or a zoo on such a big land. Instead, the whole place is occupied just to satisfy the rich. Seeing his expensive cart roll away, the elderly man gets a heart attack and eventually dies. At Foster's home, Prendergast learns about the ex-wife and daughter Adele, but Foster's mother doesn't tell him where they live. She only gives Beth's full name, which could be a lead for the officers. After the golf incident, Foster walks through the yard of a plastic surgeon, scaring the groundskeeper, his wife, and children who are using their employer's pool in his absence. Surprisingly, the sight of the happy family causes Foster to become emotional, and he starts sharing his own family story with the groundskeeper. At the police station, Prendergast finally finds out Beth and Adele's current address. Elsewhere, Foster stops at one last phone booth to call Beth, where he accidentally reveals that he's nearby her house. Hearing this, Beth immediately flees with Adele. A while later, Foster reaches Beth's house, but she's already escaped with Adele. In the next scene, Foster watches old videos of his family and realizes that they may have gone to a nearby amusement park. So he readies to go there, but Prendergast and Sandra arrive before he can go after Beth. During the encounter, Foster shoots Sandra, injuring her, and flees the house. Adamant on catching the perpetrator, Prendergast goes after him. At the amusement park, Foster finally finds Beth and Adele. While the daughter is happy to see him, Beth is horrified. Foster pulls out a gun to restrain Beth and plays with his daughter. He then puts his gun down to caress Adele. Thankfully, Prendergast arrives at the scene and interrupts Foster's reunion. To keep him engaged, Prendergast shares about his family. He lost his daughter when she was just 2 years old, and his wife hasn't been normal ever since. He notes that everyone has a problem in their life, but that is no excuse for Foster's childish violence. When police sirens distract Foster, Beth kicks the gun away and Prendergast draws his revolver, demanding Foster give himself up. However, Foster states that he would rather die than give up, so Adele can inherit his life insurance. He claims to have another gun in his pocket and proposes a duel on the count of 3. This prompts Prendergast to shoot Foster, revealing that he only had a toy water pistol taken from Adele. Foster's dead body floats away in the river below. In the final scene, Prendergast returns to Beth's house where Captain Yardley praises him in front of the media. On the other hand, Officer Sandra is taken by an ambulance while Prendergast comforts Adele and Beth.